All right, also this video is going to cover the use of MIDI and software instruments in Logic and use of MIDI and Logic or MIDI and or software tracks in Logic specifically, and just talk about the general concept and how it works. So this is a really interesting video because this is actually a video of a player piano, which of course is an invention that was made in the late 19th century. This is a player organ, in fact. And you can see there's a piano roll basically playing notes, right? In fact, if I go to another video, let me just play a little bit of this. You can see this in action. So as I talked about with this, really what's happening here is you have a roll of piano notes that are on a piece of paper, right? And through a mechanical motion, these little levers are pulled, and the little levers allow for notes to sound or not sound, and that's how the music is generated. Now, what's really important what's interesting about this is that it's very similar to the way we do MIDI and what is called a virtual instrument in Logic, all right? So if I play this, you'll see what I mean by close up. You can see how this is in action. Fast forward here. Okay, so this little roll here is actually removable, and you could put in a different song and play another song on the player piano. All the roll does is tell the piano what notes to play, right? The piano itself is the instrument that's playing the sounds, but it itself doesn't have any sort of notes that it plays. It's waiting for data about notes to play. And that's exactly how MIDI works as well, okay? So if we go to the next slide here, really important to remember about this is we now have two different types of tracks, okay? Now there are other types of tracks in Logic as well, but really these are the only two we're going to use in this class. And I want you to notice the difference between them. So as we've been using here on the right side, an audio track looks like this. It has an input, which usually is a microphone, or the way we've been using audio tracks is that we add audio signals to it, right? We add an audio file that plays back, and that becomes the input source, okay? And that is what an audio track is. If we add an audio track, it adds an audio track with a number, basically in succession, audio 1 through whatever. If you have 50 tracks, then the next one will be 51, which they can be renamed. You'll notice over here on the instrument track, we now, as an input instead, we have what's called the E-piano, which stands for electric piano. So Logic has a bunch of instruments that are software or what are called virtual instruments that run inside the computer and basically play MIDI data or piano rolls, right? Just like the original piano roll. And that's how the sound is basically comes out of the synthesizer. So let's talk about how this works. Another couple other things you'll notice that there's also this one called MIDI effects. And so we can add actually effects to the MIDI notes themselves as we go, all right? So in addition to that, you can see the difference between these types of tracks here. This is from the arrange window again. You can see that our classic audio track down here has audio data in it, right? And you're gonna see the volume scope down at the bottom, the actual audio signal. A MIDI track, which is what this classic electric piano shows, will show you what looks just like a piano roll, right? And this is actually called the piano roll. It's a series of lines and dashes that indicate specific notes and specific other values like volume or velocity or panning, and also note duration. So it's important to recognize these two different types of tracks because you cannot put them vice versa, right? Meaning I cannot now drop an audio file into a MIDI track. It will not work. And vice versa, I cannot drop a MIDI region into an audio track. That will not work. So we need to be aware of what types of tracks we're using. In addition to that, if I, for instance, add an audio track and try and play the keyboard in it, it will not work, right? An audio track plays back audio files or it records sound from a microphone. It does not play back a virtual instrument. So let's talk about MIDI now. This is a word I've been using a bunch. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it is a very old protocol from the early 80s, actually, probably the late 70s when it was developed, to basically communicate from a MIDI keyboard or an external keyboard device to a computer, okay? And also not just to computers, but also to other audio sound drivers, right? Other audio, what am I thinking? Like external instruments, basically, that are kind of like computers, but all they do is have sounds in them. So we now still use the MIDI protocol, though, for things even that are still all inside the computer at this point, right? We have inside the computer, we can designate notes and stuff even without a keyboard, and it's still using the same protocols of MIDI. So MIDI parameters specifically, they are values between 0 and 127. And this is a very old protocol, obviously, it's very low resolution. That will be changing. There's something called MIDI 2.0, which has been developed and is hopefully going to be the new standard. And it gives you way more resolution in your audio or your MIDI signals. So really important here, first of all, is about MIDI notes. Okay, MIDI notes are transferred or sent over from a computer via what are called MIDI notes, and they're also just assigned numbers. Okay, so if I go over to Max here, my little audio program, or that I use all the time, right? If I make a keyboard and I attach a message box to the first outlet, I will get a posting of a MIDI note. Okay, so for instance, I know that middle C is 60, right? And the octave below it is 48, and the octave above that is 72. So every note on the keyboard has a MIDI number, what's called a MIDI number, with middle C in the center. And we use these numbers basically to tell the computer what note I'm playing, right? And that's how I tell the computer to play a G or to play an F. I'm not telling it to play a specific frequency, right? I'm actually telling it to play a MIDI note. Now, if I wanted to see the frequencies, I could use an object called the MTOF, and that can convert these values into frequencies, and I can see the actual frequency of a specific MIDI note, right? 261.62 for middle C. So MIDI numbers, though, are the numbers that are sent from your MIDI keyboard to the computer. And it's not really that important to know them, just to know that that's what's happening. The velocity is a value of intensity of notes, okay? And I'm going to go through all these things in Logic and just show you how they work. But the intensity of a note is important to remember is not volume, okay? The volume of a pitch is how loud it is, right? But intensity is a change in timbre as the sound gets louder, all right? So if you think about a piano as a perfect example, if I play a piano note quietly, it actually has a different profile than a note played loudly. A note played loudly is going to have more of a wider dynamic range, a more intense sound, and that's what velocity attempts to mimic, okay? Now, all the keyboards in the MIDI lab are velocity sensitive, meaning that if you play the notes loudly, they will record loudly as velocity sensitive. Remember, good thing to remember too, that not all synthesizers are velocity sensitive. It just depends on what you've chosen in Logic. Some may react to velocity, some may not. Panning is another one. We don't use it this much, actually very much at all in general, but you can affect the panning with MIDI numbers between 0 and 127, and it's often expressed in Logic as negative 63 to 64, with 0 being the center or no panning, right? Pitch bend is really interesting. And aftertouch, pitch bend, of course, is bending the note of the sound, which we can do with what's called a pitch bender or a mod wheel. And then aftertouch is something we don't have on our keyboards, but it basically would allow you to press down harder on a MIDI note once you've sounded it to send data to say to play that note louder. It can be really interesting, actually. Okay? So let's talk about the piano roll now, because this is where all the action happens on a MIDI channel. Okay? The piano roll is where MIDI notes are recorded, and it's also where MIDI notes are edited and changed. Okay? And we have to access this window basically to change MIDI notes. So let's back up and get into Logic then and talk about how this is done. All right. First of all, if I create a new track, it's important to recognize what type of track we're talking about here. All we're using in this class is audio tracks, right? Which is what we've used so far. And now we're going to start using software instrument tracks. Okay. Now, I say the word MIDI a lot, so don't confuse yourself and use external MIDI track, okay? An external MIDI track is related to an external, like literally an external box, almost looks like a stereo, basically, a stereo unit that has other sounds in it, or could be a keyboard with sounds in it. That's an external MIDI instrument that we don't have actually access to any of those. So what we're using is software instrument tracks, okay? And these are the tracks that allow us to plug in an instrument and play it on the MIDI keyboard and record on the MIDI keyboard and edit the MIDI notes, okay? So again, these two tracks are the ones we're going to be using in this class. And that's it, really, okay? So we're talking now, though, about software instrument tracks. So you can see, first of all, I have the software instrument. It loaded default to be the MIDI, what's called the electric piano. Now, if I open it, you can see it's kind of a vintage a little kind of a vintage electric piano sound. And there are presets just like the effects, right? Just like reverb, I can add modern classic, and I get a different sound. Just choosing a different preset. Now, and there, of course, all these knobs can be turned and slided and changed to cater your own sounds, right? So I can do all kinds of stuff in here. Important to note that there are many instruments in Logic for creating sounds, okay? Now, and then inside each instrument, there are many, many settings, okay? So I can, for instance, choose Alchemy, which is Logic's kind of most powerful synth. And then there are a whole vast array of other sounds that Alchemy can make, okay? There are drum machines. There's an FM synthesizer, which is a specific type of synthesis. There is a sampler, which we're going to talk about later in the semester. There are some string horns and studio strings and horns, which are meant to mock or to not make fun of, but to mimic real strings and horns. Actually, they're pretty good. They're pretty effective. So those are useful. But anyways, there are all kinds of synthesizers here to pick from, okay? If I play my MIDI keyboard, I should hear sound once I have a track selected and I've loaded a synth in here, okay? Now, I don't have a keyboard connected right now, so I actually have this little typing keyboard, and I can just type over here if I want and to play notes, okay? Now, one really important thing here is what's called the library, all right? It can be a real bear to try and find a sound in here. So imagine I want to play a piano, okay? And let me close that window for now. So if I wanted to play an acoustic piano, what instrument in here plays the acoustic piano? Well, I may not know, okay? And trying to find it would be really hard. So the best thing you can do here is use what's called the library, all right? Now, if I click on this button at the very top left, it's called the library. It is going to open up the library panel on the far left. And now I can actually navigate through all these different sounds and find something I'm looking for. So for instance, synthesizers, maybe I'm looking for a plucked synthesizer, and then you can see all of these presets for a plucked synthesizer sound. And I can listen to them and load them up. So if I click on, for instance, Cavernous Dreams, Cavernous Dreams is played by a synthesizer called Sculpture, okay? And also in this plugin, there's an EQ and a compressor, okay, to make this sound. Let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, so that is the specific sound called Cavernous Dreams. It's using this interface, which is a monster called Sculpture, which is a modeling synthesizer, to play these notes that I'm playing on the keyboard. So if I wanted to find a piano, I can scroll back to the left here, go to piano, and choose Steinway Grand. Okay, now the Steinway Grand is played by the sampler. It has an EQ on it and a compressor and a slight tape delay to make this have a little bit of a room feel to it. Okay, so now I'm off and running. Like if I wanted to add another track, I could go up here to track, new software instrument. It's going to load a new track with the default setting, which is electric piano, but then I can add another instrument if I want. Okay, so let's talk about now the piano roll and actually recording notes, right? Because it's nice that I can play notes, but I need to record them onto the piano roll into a region on the track. All right. So the easiest way to do this is to go up here, and I have to record enable my track first. So I hit record enable, and that basically arms the track for recording. And now it's ready to record. So a couple of things are going to happen here. First of all, I have my metronome turned on, the click track, all right? And that's going to give me literally a tick-tock, back and forth so that I know what tempo my track is in. Now, my tempo is set here. It says tempo 120. I could change this to 100 if I wanted, okay? And then my metronome will slow down. But anyways, I'm off and running. This is really important too. It's called the count in button. And what it will do is it will count in 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever I set it. Could be 2 bars. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, and then it will start recording. If I want to just start recording right away, I can turn this off. If I want to ignore tempo and meter, I can turn off the metronome too. Okay? I'm going to leave the metronome on, and I'm also going to leave the count in on. So all I have to do now, because my track is armed, is I now can just click this button right here, the record button, and it's going to start recording. Okay, now I need to record enable again because I clicked out of there. Now I'm also going to hit the R key. R will do the same thing. Okay, so there I just made a little 2-bar loop. I can loop that if I want. But you can see my MIDI notes have been added into this window. Okay, now let's talk about how I could change these and access the piano roll. Because say I made a wrong note, right? I can change the notes that I made. And also if I hit spacebar now, it's literally going to play these notes. I can turn the metronome off even. Okay, so if I double click on this, it's going to open up a little panel down at the bottom that shows my MIDI notes. Okay, I can also go up here when this is selected. If I go up here to Window and I pan down to Piano View or Open Piano Roll. Okay, remember I told you it's called a piano roll. There it is. Here's the piano roll for this track. I like this actually. I can edit this better. It's kind of a bigger window. It's nice. One thing you'll notice too, well, you probably don't know what it means, but at this point, all of my notes actually are at the same velocity, right? Remember, velocity is the intensity of the notes in the melody. So imagine I wanted to change some things here. So imagine I played this note wrong. So really important to remember, to know in Logic is that there's something called the tool palette, okay? And the tool palette allows me to access a bunch of tools that I'm going to use to edit things, right? Like a brush or a pencil or an eraser. And I access this by hitting the T key, all right? T. And it opens up this panel and I can choose a bunch of different tools, right? The pointer is really useful for moving notes. So say I don't like where this note is. I want to move it around. I can lengthen a note. Oops, let me lengthen that. Right? I can shorten a note. I can do all kinds of things to it. And that can be useful. I also want to use the velocity tool. So the velocity tool is going to actually allow me to manually change the velocity of specific notes. So I'm going to select that. And then if I just slide up or down, watch what happens. So you can see and hear the intensity change of my notes. I'm going to grab all of these and lower their velocity. I'm going to lower this note too. One thing I'm going to do though is kind of make a classic phrasing style where it gets louder on the higher pitches. Okay? Okay? I can also zoom in here just by using the scroll wheel or using command arrows, and you'll notice that these notes don't start together very well. So maybe I want to drag these over so they start together. Okay. So anyways, this is my piano roll, right? And I can edit in here. I could add more notes too by going T and then pencil, and then I can literally write more notes. So say I decide I want to add another octave below the low C, I could do that. Actually, this chord is F, so let's go up to F. And that should be a C. So let me go here. Okay, so I can close this window now, and you can see that my MIDI region here has been edited. I can option drag this over if I want to make more of them, right? Say I want to copy this and have this repeat for a long time. One of the coolest things is I can now remember that these MIDI notes in this piano roll are nothing more than triggers for notes, right? Notes and durations, and in this case, also some velocities now that I edited them. So I'm going to option drag this down to this instrument, and actually I'm going to choose a synthesizer. So I'm going to go to synthesizers, I'm going to choose pads, and then I'm going to try and find something nice, but I may have to play around and find something that sounds good. All right, let's try Fireflies for fun. Hear what that sounds like. So that's kind of cool, actually. And as you can see, I can change this sound. That's a little weird. Let's try this one. So you'll notice some of these synths are really funky, and they're going to give you like more non-tonal sounds, right? Some of them might be really loud too. You might want to change some things. So, but the general idea is, right, that these MIDI notes can basically go on any instrument to play it, right? I could decide that I want this to be on string sounds, right? So I'm going to go down here to Studio Strings. I'm going to choose sectional instruments and just pick one of these settings. Now they're really loud, so I'm going to turn this down. So you get the idea though, right? I'm using a MIDI instrument basically to add a new instrument. I'm just copying the same chords. Now, maybe I decide in my strings here, some of the notes are too low, so I want to actually get rid of, maybe I just want these notes only to play the low, not the melody at all. All they're going to do is play these held chords. So I can just go in and delete the extras, right? So, I mean, the possibilities are endless now, of course, using MIDI to create variation. Now, I can still add audio files and have other sounds, right? I can do all kinds of stuff, but I'm basically using MIDI to create variation and to do all kinds of stuff. So, what else was I going to show you? I think that's it. That really explains everything. Now, a really important thing to remember is that we can add a synth here. Like right now, the sampler is playing the piano sound, but under that is still all of our effects, right? So I could still add, for instance, a reverb or a delay or a tremolo or anything to this sound if I wanted to, right? It's totally optional. But there is usually a preset, meaning if I click on again, if I go to this track, if I go back here, let's go to guitar, classic clean, okay? You can see that this guitar is using the sampler. It has a pedal board effect to it, which if I click on it, you can see what that is. It's an input where I can actually drag these pedals and get different effects in there. It's kind of cute. And then also an amp. And this amp is kind of like a classic guitar amp emulator, okay? And that's basically how I can add those notes, all right? So one other quick thing too, say I don't want to record with the keyboard at all right? The keyboard is, I don't know the keyboard, I can't play the MIDI keyboard very well. I just want to enter notes with the pencil, okay? So what I can do is I can create a new track, instrument track, sure. And maybe I want to create something with a marimba. So I'm going to click on the marimba. Now I can click in this window area right here, hit T again for tool palette, go to pencil, and then draw a MIDI region, okay? Now you can see I can draw a MIDI region that length. And then I hit T again and T again to automatically pick the pointer, okay? Then I'm going to hit double click on marimba, and now I have an empty region down here, right? And so I can actually click down here with the pencil, grab the pencil tool, and start clicking and adding notes, right? So this might be the way that you choose to write your MIDI notes. Right? I can resize these notes by grabbing the ends of them. I could grab the tool palette again, grab these and slide them over to make them short. I mean, it's a marimba anyways. I could hit T again and go to velocity and then change the intensity of some of these notes, right? So that they're more varying. I could make chords by having more than one note at simultaneously sounding, right? Notice too the MIDI keyboard. The MIDI keyboard is always on the left side here, showing you which note you're choosing, right? And in fact, this is actually really convenient because you can click on the note and it will highlight every note on that line, or every MIDI note that's on that, or every MIDI tick, I guess they're called, on that note will be highlighted and show up, okay? All right. Anyways, that is the end of this video. Hopefully that gets you up and running, recording in Logic and recording different sounds.